Hi, everybody. Welcome to What the Fuck Wednesdays. Today we have a bizarre case. It's the case of Sante and Kenny Kimes. They are a mother and son. They were a mother and son tag team duo. Uh, they were grifters. They were murderers. Um, and they were evil. They were truly, truly evil. We have a lot of pictures today to help us get through this case because this case it zigzags all over the place. So let's get started, shall we? I don't know why. Well, Ronnie Lynn, it's going to be a frozen picture because that's an actual picture. It doesn't move. Ronnie says she's not getting any sound. Um, the mic was working okay when I added it. Yeah, but that's a frozen picture because it's a picture. He's not going to move and juggle and do a whole bunch of stuff. All right. So they made it out. The family made it out to Los Angeles, and let me see one thing because I really did want to have the pictures more profiled there, but I guess I can't. I'm not really sure what the plan was uh, when Sante's father took them out to Los Angeles. But when he got out there, I think whatever he did have planned, it didn't quite go the way he expected it to. And he ended up abandoning his wife. And let me see here. She's out in LA. Her oldest son was very troubled. Well, he was the only son. He was very, very troubled. He according to the younger sister, Rita, he was very inappropriate with Sante. And he also had a violent temper. He did end up, at one point, beating his mother up, beating Mary up, and he took her wedding ring and any money that she had, and he took off. The oldest daughter also took off, and that just left Rita here. This is Sante's youngest sister. This left Rita and Sante alone with their mother. There was a gentleman who owned a factory, and it had some room above it, and he felt bad for them. That's one story, was that he felt really bad for Mary, Sante's mother, and the two girls, and he let them live above the factory for free. But there's another story, in fact, that Sante started herself, and that was that her mother was a prostitute. And so if that was in fact the case, that's probably why Sante and her mother and sister were allowed to live above the factory. They were probably doing some favors up there, right? According to Rita, Sante had a really vicious streak about her. She was cruel to other children. She was cruel to animals. And right around the time when she was 12 and the three of them were in Los Angeles, Sante was prone to throwing violent temper tantrums if she didn't get what she wanted. Somehow, Sante, around the age of 13, she meets this couple. They own a soda shop in Los Angeles, and she befriends them. I think they probably felt bad for her, depending on who knows what she had said. Sante was rapidly becoming a liar, and she was also very good at creating her own stories, her own history. They felt bad for her. The wife had a sister who was living in Carson, Nevada, and she talked to her sister and her husband about adopting Sante. They agreed. They were excited. They had already adopted a boy, and so they were very excited to have a girl. This woman was, her name was Mary Chambers. She was a bookkeeper. Her husband, Edwin, he did some work with the military, and they were very well respected in Carson City, Nevada. If there was anything going on in town, they were invited. Sante was extremely doted upon by this couple. And her mother and sister didn't miss her. They didn't miss her at all. They were more than agreeable for Sante to get adopted by somebody else. Well, hi, Tish. How are you? Welcome to the case of Sante and Kenny Kynes. Sante, she did really well in Nevada. And even though she wasn't exactly popular, because she did, her paternal father was of Indian descent. And that was, there was prejudice. There was prejudice. Hi, Tish. Hi. There was prejudice. Sante had a reputation of kind of being a bully. She would belittle and intimidate other students. By the time she entered high school, she had started to really kind of cake on a lot of white powder in order to try to hide the fact that she had some Indian blood in her. She didn't think that she would fit in very well. And she did. Now, I don't know where that other one is. Okay, I guess I don't have it. She did end up making really good friends with a girl named Ruth. Ruth was a little more of a follower. Sante, even at that young age, I don't know that they had the word narcissism in the 50s, somebody being a narcissist, but certainly in all the later interviews, that's how people refer to her. And Ruth was more of a codependent. So Sante would kind of come up with a plan and lead them into trouble, and Ruth would just go along with it. Sante was probably that friend that other parents warned their kids about to stay away from, right? When they graduate from high school in Nevada, Sante decides, and she gets Ruth to go along with it, that they're going to go to Los Angeles. Now, Sante had some minor run-ins with the police in Nevada. She frequently shoplifted, even though she had money to pay for whatever she needed or wanted. Certainly after she went to live with the Chambers, she didn't want for anything. But I think what you're going to see is a recurring pattern with Sante is that there was never, ever, ever, ever enough for her. She always wanted more. And another pattern that Sante had was when she would get into trouble with the law, she would simply pack up and move. She convinces Ruth after they graduate that they should go to Los Angeles and attend a school for journalism. And not too long after she's there, she meets up with a guy that had been a former boyfriend in high school, Ed Walker, and they got married. Ed was, actually, that's her first husband. I kind of jumped. So, let me tell you something about this if you look Sante up in Wikipedia. Wikipedia is going to say Sante had two husbands, but she actually had married somebody right out of high school, this fella. And I don't know why he isn't listed in her Wikipedia. They weren't married for very long. It's not even really clear why she wanted to marry him. She actually pretended that she was pregnant to get him to propose to her. And after about 5 months, it became pretty clear that she wasn't pregnant. And then he took a job as a school teacher. And that was not going to cut it with Sante. Sante had really, I want to say she had really big dreams, but it wasn't so much as she had really big dreams as she had really big needs. And the things that we would think of as, so you have things in life that you really need. And then there's the things in life that you really want. And Sante's wants were over in the category of needs. And that's how she saw them. And she needed them, whatever it was. Whether it was that lipstick, whether it was a new dress, a car, whatever it was, she felt she needed it to survive, and it didn't matter what she had to do to get it. The marriage went south really quickly. Who knows why? She was obviously disgruntled with him being a school teacher. I don't know what she thought he was going to be when she married him. or if she was up to her ways of stealing again. Whatever it was, they parted ways. And it wasn't too long, maybe within a year, that's when Sante met up with her former boyfriend, Ed Walker. And she met Ed. And look, Ed had a lot going for him. He was very enamored with Sante. He was a builder and he had a very promising career. They were going to live a pretty comfortable life. And so the two of them got married and they went from Los Angeles to Sacramento, which I didn't know that she had come through Sacramento until I started doing the research. And listen, Ed did provide for her. She lived very well. There wasn't too much that she couldn't have. There was just always more that she wanted. Even though he made a really comfortable living as a builder and a general contractor in Sacramento, Sante just always set the bar financially just a little higher than he could reach. And then in December of 1960, Sante set fire to a house that Ed had built to collect the insurance money. She really only succeeded in destroying the kitchen, but that was enough to get her about $10,000 in insurance, which in 2023 would be the equivalent of like $103,000. So that's a lot of money, right? So you can imagine the homes that this guy was building if a kitchen was worth that much. Now listen, nobody knew that Sante had set the fire. Okay? Nobody really even suspected it. Certainly her husband didn't. But over the course of their marriage, and they weren't married like dozens of years, okay? During the course of their marriage, dozens of homes that Ed had worked on or helped build all burned down. And Sante made sure she was the one that went and picked up every single insurance check. As a matter of fact, she got a reputation, though they couldn't prove it. They couldn't prove that it was her because there were so many fires, all related to these two. They didn't suspect the husband, but the fire department, the officials in Sacramento started to refer to Sante as the Dragon Lady. Yeah. Tish W says she didn't play around except with matches. She played around with a little more than that. You're gonna see. Sante also had a number of affairs with Ed's really wealthy business associates. You know, most guys, men that get into building homes and especially, you know, doing big residential property subdivisions, you know, that was a big thing back then. They're wealthy. That takes a lot of money to start those companies. And Sante was having a lot of affairs with these wealthy business associates of his. There's some of the homes that Ed had worked on in Sacramento. And Sante ends up getting pregnant with Kent. Don't know if it's Kent's actual son, because she was having affairs all over the place. But Kent was born in 1962, and she and Ed stay together for a few more years, and finally, I don't know who had enough, but there's a divorce, and this is Sante's second divorce. She's now got her son, Kent, with her, and in 1971 she pops up in Palm Springs. Now, Sante was now really going to hone in on finding herself a wealthy man. And as a matter of fact, Kent, this is her son Kent, and he's written a book about her, and he has some sympathy for his half brother Kenny, and he still had a lot of love for his mom. He said that people really hated it when he would say it, but she was a really good mom, and that her love for her children was really fierce. That he remembers the birthday parties that you just wouldn't believe. He said all the presents were probably stolen, but the whole school was there, and man, did he ever feel like king for a day. He said he remembers Christmases, hearing his parents fight about Christmases where Sante had spent $13,000 on presents for one Christmas. Now, you remember that if $10,000 back then was worth $103,000 in today's money, $13,000. So, lady, you're spending like $110,000 on one Christmas. He said Kent said the highs were really high. He said the good times were incredible. But his mother was so focused on money. And he said that he remembers it. Tish W says $13,000 today for gifts is nuts. It is nuts. Who does that? But imagine if really you were spending the equivalent, which is $105,000, $110,000 on Christmas. He said his mom was so focused on money. And, well, hi, Trish, welcome. That some of his earliest memories from childhood are of his mother telling him, don't marry for looks, don't marry for brains, don't marry for personality. You marry for money because it's the only thing that lasts. So Sante and little Kent are in Palm Springs, and Sante is trying to figure out who lucky bachelor number 3 is going to be, right? She probably left with a little bit of money when she left Ed. She probably burnt something down, right? And got some money. Some bus fare. But she needs to get somebody else on the hook pretty fast. She tried her hands at fraud a couple times. She's gotten caught. One of her very first arrests was actually in Los Angeles when she defrauded, her friend Ruth, good old Ruth, good old standby friend Ruth. She actually defrauded Ruth's future father-in-law. She was going to department stores and opening accounts and signing his name for makeup and perfume and jewelry and clothes. Again, not stuff she needed. It wasn't stuff to eat. It wasn't stuff she was turning around and selling, to pay the rent. It was stuff that made Sante feel better about being Sante. Did Sante ever work at a real job? Not that I know of. Not that I know of. She didn't. And what happens is Sante is looking for her next mark, and she was, I don't think anybody would say that she was unattractive, right? But what she realized now, mid 60s, she probably got a lot of compliments and comments that she had a big resemblance towards, why is my picture? That she had a big resemblance towards Elizabeth Taylor. And she doesn't much look like it there, but she starts to play that up. She starts to wear really big black wigs, and she really does. You'll see that really soon. So while she is trying to figure out her next big move, she comes across this magazine, Millionaire Magazine. Can you think of a worse magazine to fall into the hands of Sante Kimes? She is reading this magazine, and in it is an article about this motel tycoon named, just the worst magazine ever. I mean, she needed the want ads to fall into her lap, or I don't know, Good Housekeeping, maybe, parenting magazine. I don't know, a job application, but no, none of that comes her way. Some good old Millionaire Magazine, and in it she reads an article about this motel tycoon, Kenneth Kimes Sr. And she's reading about his divorce in the magazine, and she's learning that he had a net worth of $20 million. Now, remember, his $10,000 was worth $103. $20 million in the 70s? What do you think that would be worth today? He was very, very, very wealthy, and he was fairly guarded with his money. He watched over his money. He didn't have a lot of accountants or anything like that. He really was very hands-on with his fortune. Oh, let me see. Oh, I've got it here in my notes. So his $20 million would have been the equivalent in 2023 of $115 million. So that's wealthy. 20 million's wealthy. $115 million. I don't think you have a lot of problems. Not financially. I don't think you're going to have a lot of problems with 115 million. And that's after his divorce. He did have 2 children from his previous marriage. They were grown. Doesn't mean that he wasn't still giving them money. I'm sure that he was. And in fact, he considered his fortune theirs. And that's why he guarded it so closely. But he had a problem. He had a couple problems. One, Sante was after him. He didn't even know it yet. But he was also an alcoholic. And so that's a huge vulnerability. If somebody is intent in taking advantage of somebody else and they have a problem with alcohol, that's in my mind, that is just a wide open door for trouble to walk through, because all they have to do is get you liquored up, maybe, and get you agreeable to sign some checks, get you agreeable to, I don't know if they had ATMs back then, but get you agreeable to hand over the credit card. Um, so he was very vulnerable in that area, and he was also vulnerable because Sante really studied him. She found out, now there she is. There she is looking like Elizabeth Taylor, doesn't she? She was really playing that up. So if you remember when Sante had first left Carson City, Nevada, and had gone to Los Angeles, she and Ruth had gone to Los Angeles to go to journalism school. I don't think she graduated, but hey, Sante is not one who is afraid to embellish. Sante figures out a way to get an interview with good old millionaire Kenneth Kimes. And she says that she's there to interview him for an article. For what paper, for what magazine? I don't know what she came up with, but she came up with something. And she had studied him. She had found out that his favorite color was white. So she started wearing only white. She found out that he loved the smell of gardenias. She found a perfume that smelled like gardenias. Yeah, for the Sante Times. There she is, right? All dolled up in white. She meets him, and according to people that knew him, boy, did his life get really exciting. His life got real exciting once Sante came into it. And it should have, because she was just stealing things. There was one time they were at a hotel to have a romantic night together, and they're downstairs in the lounge, and Sante sees a woman enter the lounge, and the woman takes off her fur coat, her full-length fur coat, and she drapes it on the back of a bar stool and goes to talk to some people. And Sante tells Ken, oh, let's go up to the room. And on their way up to the room, she just grabs the mink right off of the back of the chair. And Ken was like, whoa, whoa, when they got upstairs. He didn't cause a scene in the bar. They got upstairs, so they're walking to the room, and he says, wait a minute, you got to take that back. And she goes, no, it's not a big deal. I'm going to have the lining replaced, because if you have a real fur coat, your name is in the lining. And it's not in there with like magic marker, okay? It's on a tag, it's embroidered, my aunt had some furs, and literally you store your furs. Like, we had to take them to the House of Furs in downtown Sacramento, because they have, I don't know what they have in there, but I'm going to assume it's something similar to like a cigar humidified type of a room for the furs. And so when it's like not fur season, your furs go to the House of Furs. Like, it's a big deal. I don't get it, but just seriously. So she says, no big deal. I'm going to replace the lining, and her insurance is going to write her a check, and everything's going to be fine. He said, no, that's stealing. She said, don't use that word. I don't like that word. She goes, that word makes it sound dirty. It's just a game. And nobody's really hurt by it because of the insurance. So I don't know if that was a trick she picked up when she was burning houses, but that was how she rationalized stealing that lady's coat. Ronnie Lynn said someone did that to my coat, but it wasn't fur, and it wasn't fun either, was it? Still not nice. Still not very nice. Ronnie Lynn says, thanks, Tish. It was in Temple Bar in Dublin. Everybody, If you're at Temple Bar, Dublin, take off your jacket, whatever you do. Not in Temple Bar. Over there, we got the word out, Ronnie. I'm not going to happen again there. Temple Bar in Dublin, do not take off your coat. Ronnie Lynn's coat got hijacked. Okay, let's get Dave Kavanaugh on the place. Dave Kavanaugh on the case. I think he only goes to, well, he might go to that bar. I don't know. He only goes to that other one, Moody McMurray's or something like that. But anyways, Sante really stays after Ken, and eventually she takes about a year, but she does get him to move her and Kent, her son, into his home. And it's a beautiful home. It's right on the beach. I want to say it was in Long Beach, but it could have been in Malibu. They always had beautiful homes. They went out a lot. They had maids. Sante, even though they weren't married, Sante she didn't really have any financial worries. Ken was taking care of both her and her son Kent, and they took vacations. They went to Hawaii a lot. They eventually ended up having a home there. And Sante did not like his children, his grown children from the previous marriage. She referred to them as the creeps. She could not figure out how she could get get their father. She could not figure out how to come between them. And his grown children from his previous marriage, there was no love lost on their end for Sante. They weren't heartbroken that she didn't like them, because they didn't much care for her either. And they were together for 4 years. And according to friends of Ken's, Ken had said, she's a lot of fun, and my life is very interesting since Sante came into it. But I'm never going to marry her, because all she will do is try to figure out a way to get a hold of my money. And my money is for my children. Sante really wanted to, even though who Ken was and what Ken was doing and the fortune he had amassed was incredible and it was impressive, she always wanted more. And so they were on a trip to Washington, D.C. once, and Sante somehow, I don't know how, Sante concocts a term, a title for Ken, and as an ambassador. And listen, she was a master at crashing parties and getting away with it. But this time she crashes a party. She makes it past the Secret Service. And she gets into the same party right here with Vice President Gerald Ford, and that's his wife, Betty. We all know, Betty is clean and sober, and she has done some wonderful things with the Betty Ford Clinic. Now, I can see Sante, if Betty was still drinking, I could see Sante getting into their house, but she made it past the Secret Service. And then when they left, they went and crashed 2 more parties. So Sante was a con, and she was a fraud. And some things like this, I don't care how much of a drinking problem Ken had. Ken knew very well he wasn't an ambassador. And he knew very well when she stole the fur coat. He knew a lot of things. But I think because of his drinking, he did he negated the seriousness of it. But you can see there she is right there. They didn't know the Fords, and yet they got past Secret Service. Sante's getting a little bit restless because they're not married. So what is the best way to get a hold of somebody's money and to get them to marry you? Let's make a baby. Give him an heir. In 1975, Sante gives birth to Kenny Kimes Jr., and he is the love of his mother's life. His father is very enamored with him as well. Sante kept Kenny really, really, really close. Where Kent went to public schools and socialized, with kids his own age, even though they moved a lot. They were moving all over the place. Kent did get away from his mother Monday through Friday, at least during the day when he went to school. Kenny, Sante kept home with tutors. And Kent said that at one point, there's Kent when he was older, that he got into a big argument with his mom, and he said, look, because Kent was 13 years older than Kenny. And Kent said, look, the kid needs friends. He needs to be social with kids his own age, not just adults. And Sante didn't feel that the school system was smart enough for her brilliant son, Kenny. Nobody was good enough for him. She did eventually somewhat back down, and she would go to friends that had kids Kenny's age, and she would have those kids come over to befriend him, and he made friends really easily. He was a really likable kid. He was smart. He had a lot of charm. And it's hard to refer to Sante as charming, but I think some of the best cons are very charming, and that's how they get away with things. And Kenny had gotten a lot of his mother's charm, but though he would make friends with these kids really easily, and they really liked him, it would never last, because Sante would either decide that the kids weren't good enough to be friends with Kenny, or they would move because Sante had caused some trouble. She had her shoplifting habit. She had written bad checks. She had, and this is while she's with Ken. This is while she's with Kenneth, the millionaire. She's still doing this stuff. And I saw in some of the research I did, because they'll have specialists, psychologists and stuff that come and they talk about this. And they said that the things that she did were mostly born out of arrogance. Well, hi, Mary Lou, welcome. That it was arrogance, that she wanted to show what she could get away with. She got in some trouble in Los Angeles, so they up and moved to Hawaii, Honolulu, beautiful property, and they live there. They live a very lavish lifestyle. There would be a uniform maid that would answer the door. Another different uniform maid would take, if you were a visitor, would take your coat, make sure that you had a drink. You were served by a different uniform maid. There's somebody in the kitchen cooking. They were extremely well-to-do. They moved probably 5 or 6 times when they were in Hawaii, and then Sante, good old Sante, of course, causes some problems in Hawaii. So they come back to the States. But at this point, Kent is 17. And he's had it with Sante's moving around and all of her shenanigans and games, because she was not shy about getting her children involved in her games. Remember? It was never stealing, it was games. And so he stays behind, and the family comes back to the States. And then Sante and Ken are arrested in 1985 for violating federal anti-slavery laws. Who gets arrested in 1985 for slavery? That girl, that chick right there. And she takes her husband down with her. Remember all those maids that she had? Everybody was so impressed by. Yeah, they were so impressed. As a matter of fact, one of her very affluent friends in Hawaii had said to her, Sante, it is so hard to get good domestic help in the islands in Hawaii. Where do you find these? Where do you find these maids? And they stay with you. And Sante told her, well, maybe when I know you better, I'll tell you my secret. This was Sante's secret. Sante for years had been going to Mexico. And she would go to Mexico and she would find these women on the street. I'm not saying they were prostitutes, on the street. And she would convince them to come back to the United States with her and work for her, and that they would be paid well and they would live a life of luxury and prosperity in the United States. And what would happen is Sante would get them to the United States, and then she wouldn't pay them. They were not allowed to leave the homes unless she was with them. There were locks. Most of their properties were gated, and the gates would be locked. What happened was one of the maids escaped and ran over to the neighbor's property, and they called the FBI. Well, you're not allowed to have slaves. And that's what they were. And more came out about not only were they slaves and held against their will and not paid and forced to work almost around the clock, they were abused. One came forward and said that Sante had beat her with hangers, wire hangers. Another came forward and said that Sante had burned her with a hot iron when she had accidentally burned a tablecloth. And so what happened was Ken was smart. And he listened to his attorneys, and the attorneys said, plead guilty. Say that you knew what she was doing, but because of your alcohol problem, you didn't step in to stop it. And so that's what Ken Sr. did. Ken Sr. pled guilty, said, I have a drinking problem, and that has prevented me from stepping in Um, when my wife does things that are illegal, and it's also preventing me from standing up to her. And so he took that plea deal and he agreed to complete an alcohol treatment program, and he got probation with a 3-year suspended sentence. Sante will never admit that she's guilty to anything. She refused to admit that she was guilty, and she got 5 years in prison. They were married. He had married her after she had given birth to a son. So she has 5 years in prison. She's gone. And now Ken and Kenny, father and son, are living together, and it's a relatively normal life. And I think Kenny was 10 when they got arrested, so maybe 11. But his father puts him in school, albeit a very prestigious private school. But for the first time, Kenny's in school, and he's making friends, and he's living a pretty normal life, and his mom isn't there. That was the biggest thing. His mom wasn't there. And Kenny and his dad grew really close. And Kenny was really happy. And in fact, their house kind of became the house that all of his friends would hang out in. Sante was released after serving 3 years. And according to Kent, this is Sante's oldest son from her second marriage, remember? According to Kent, Kenny, who's right there on the left, was not happy about his mom coming home, because he knew she was going to disrupt everything, and she was going to bring all that dysfunction back in. And that's what she did. She came home, she yanked him out of school, she moved them. It all started all over again. And then Ken Sr. dies of a brain aneurysm in 1994. And things are going to start to go downhill really, really, really fast. When Ken Sr. dies in 1994 of a brain aneurysm, he did not have a new will. So literally, Kenny and Sante had nothing. Nothing. She had access to some accounts. She did have some accounts in her own name that Ken Sr. would put money into for her, kind of like an allowance. But she didn't have her name on any of their properties, any of their homes, any of his accounts. So what does good old Sante do? Because she has to keep things going. She doesn't tell anybody that he's dead. And as a matter of fact, financially, she kept Ken Sr. alive for years. And in doing so, he had some offshore bank accounts in the Bahamas, and she was getting money out of those. She would have her son fill out the forms and forge his father's name, asking for money transfers. And Kenny didn't have anybody at this point. He's really stuck with Sante. He wanted to kill her at one point because he had gone away to some activity. His father had died in March, and he came home. Kenny came home from some kind of activity, and when he was at the airport, he said, "Where's Pop?" And this is in May, and that's when she tells him that his dad is dead. His dad had been dead for 2 months, and he didn't even know it. He wanted to kill her. He told his brother he wanted to kill her. Why Ken Sr. didn't leave anything to Kenny, I don't know. Unless he was scared that Sante would get her hands on it. And if Sante had gotten her hands on any money, it was as good as gone. But for whatever reason, he didn't leave anything to Kenny, and he didn't leave anything to Sante. And Sante, the wheels are really spinning on what she can do. And so, you remember Kent stayed in Hawaii when the family had moved back to the States. So her and Kenny decide to make a trip over to visit Kent in Hawaii. And I really think that they were, well, I think for Sante, it was just more of a place where she could plot and plan what she was going to do next. And while making it look like she's this great mother and this great grandmother, right? And there they are. I mean, they look pretty happy, but Kent said that he was filled with dread when his mother and his brother came over, because by now, Sante and Kenny really had become a team. And he said he actually came home once and he found the two of them going through his drawers, his dresser drawers. He didn't know what they were looking for. They were probably looking for his ID, passport, Social Security card, credit cards, blank checks, because that's what she did. That's what she did to anybody that she thought that she could victimize. That was her MO, to take it. If she thought she could get something out of anybody, that's what was going to happen. And so they did end up leaving. I don't think they got anything of Kent's. What happens is they go back, perhaps when Sante was in Hawaii and she had a good little bit of rest and a little bit of relaxation. She remembered that when her and Ken Sr. were going through the arrest over the slavery. Well, those women that were enslaved, they were entitled and they were awarded wages with interest. And to try to outsmart the system and the government, Ken and Sante had taken a property that they owned and they had transferred it to a really good friend. You know, Ronnie Lynn says, what happened to her love for her children? I don't think Sante loved anybody. I don't think Sante loved anybody. I don't think Sante was capable of loving anybody. I don't even know if Sante loved Sante. Sante, to me, it could have been true that she was victimized by her older brother when she was very young, and that left her confused, angry, which could have been the reasons that she, was hurting other children and hurting animals. The poverty is said to have really impacted her. though a lot of people lived through the Depression and didn't do the things that Sante did. I mean, let's take a look at some of the things that Sante did. She, this is how she's described at the very beginning of the Wikipedia, is that Sante Kimes, also known as the Dragon Lady, right? We remember that because of the arson that she was committing when she was married to Ed Walker. She was burning down houses for insurance money almost as fast as he could build them. An American, this is how she's described. Sante Kimes, also known as the Dragon Lady, was an American murderer, con artist, robber, serial arsonist, and possible serial killer who was convicted of 2 murders, as well as robbery, forgery, violation of anti-slavery laws, and numerous other crimes. Many of these crimes were committed with the assistance of her son, Kenny. Now, I'm going to tell you, when I did the research, I heard some really interesting things said about the relationship. And it's not that I felt sorry for Kenny, but what I felt bad for, I feel badly for any child who is dependent on parents who are no good. And even though Kenny wasn't abused physically, you know, he certainly had enough to eat, and he had nice homes, and he had anything that his heart desired. Sante was a very twisted influence on him. And what I heard somebody say was that in one of the documentaries that I watched, and trust me, if any of you want to go and watch documentaries or anything on this case, YouTube is just chock full of them. And what somebody said in the documentary was, Kenny never stood a chance, because Sante kept him to herself. Well, remember, in her mind, he was the key to the palace. He was how she was going to get his dad's money, right? She kept him very close. And as a child, when they would do games, okay, Ken Sr. would give her money. He'd peel off a couple $100 bills if she wanted to go to the mall, and he'd say, go buy yourself a nice dress. Something in white. You know I like you in white. And Sante would pocket the money and steal, and she'd have Kenny distract the sales lady while she did it. And Kent said, her oldest son said, that one time they were at a mall and his mother had stolen a dress, and as they were leaving, the lady, the shopkeeper, followed them out. This is before Kenny was even born, okay? And they're arguing in the parking lot. And Sante has turned around to tell Kent, get in the car, because she's, of course, going to try to, make a getaway. And the lady's screaming, and, they've called the police are coming, and Sante realizes that she can't get away. So what she does is, Kent says she turns around, and she doesn't say a thing. And she just punches him right in the face. He said she just delivered a roundhouse to him. And right after that, the police show up. Police drive right up. And Sante starts screaming, that bitch hit my child. She hit my child. And she gets Kent to go along with it. Police say, son, did this lady hit you, the shopkeeper? Kent goes, mm-hmm. Sante gets away with it. Punches her own child in the face. He said everywhere they went. She had a huge purse with her wherever they went. They'd go to the grocery store, she'd stick a roast beef in it for dinner that night. He said, and we ate well. And you know Ken's giving her money for this stuff. Her children, to me, were tools that she could use. And while she did lavish them at, with really elaborate birthday parties, and we've already talked about the Christmases, and the vacations and the homes. I think in a way she did that. I think in a way she did that to make herself feel better. I don't really think it was as much for her sons as it was for her, if that makes sense. But one of the specialists said that Sante kept Kenny so close to her, and she had involved him in these harmless games, allegedly, right? And he would always get a reward for helping her, if he would distracted somebody for her while she stole. He said it's just how he grew up. Not defending it. It was just how he grew up. It was just a part of the day. It was just a part of the routine. And the specialist said that it was as if Sante had sewn these buttons very neatly into Kenny's personality, so that if and when she needed something from him, she could just push one of them. And it was so integrated in his personality that he didn't know how to say no to his mother. So I don't think, when you look at it like that, I don't think you can say that there was any love. There was a lot of gifts, and there was a lot of elaborate holidays and things like that. But while that can be a part of love from, a parent to a child, I think that the root of love, the roots of it, have to be, you have to protect them. You have to want the best for them. You have to be dedicated to providing as many opportunities for them as you can, right? And of course, you have to provide the necessities, the basics: clothing and food and shelter, warmth, right? But I think the roots of love is protecting and nurturing them and helping them have opportunities that are going to better them. And Sante never did that. The only pursuit of opportunities that Sante pursued were for herself. Does that make sense? I don't think that there was any love. I don't think that there was any love there. So, all right. Anyways, let's get back. They're going to leave Hawaii. Their Sante is in Hawaii, and you almost can see her plotting, right? Just a random picture, but you could almost see. She almost looks angry in that picture that she's having to work so hard to figure something out. Like, how could she's probably looking up at the heavens, cursing poor Ken Sr. Is what I think is going on there. Remember I told you that Sante is she's getting some money out of the offshore accounts in the Bahamas. Well, we're gonna talk for a minute about Sante's. Well, these certainly can't be all of her victims, but we're going to talk about some of the victims that the police believe were murdered. Okay. So we're going to start with Elmer Holgren. And in 1990, Sante had hired 50-year-old, he was a lawyer, 50-year-old Elmer, to burn her Honolulu home because of a lien that was on the property. So if there's a lien on your property, you have to sell the property for more than the lien if you want to get any money from it, right? And the lien on the property was $900,000 in 1990, which is the equivalent of like 2.1, 2.2. Even in Honolulu, in the 1990s, that was a lot to ask for. You'd probably get it hands down now, no problem. But back then, I don't know. Now the insurance investigators that came out said hands down that it looked like arson to them. And they went and they interviewed old Elmer, and Elmer admitted to it. He said, yeah, I did it. I admit, I don't know what they were offering him to admit to it. He said, I'll admit to it, and I'll help you get her. She's the one that asked me to do this. And Sante finds out about Elmer, that he's going to cooperate with the investigators and prosecutors. And so what does she do? Well, she burns his offices. She burns his offices to the ground because he had a whole bunch of legal documents in there that he could have used to help prosecute her. So she burns that down. So the prosecutors and the investigators are trying to work with Elmer to try to, can he remember what the documents were? Is there any possibility some of them were filed any place, especially if they were property documents? They probably filed with the county assessor's office, right? But before the case can go to trial, Elmer tells his family that he's going to go to Costa Rica with Sante and Ken Sr. Ken Sr. was still alive at this point. And he hasn't been seen since. In November of 2000, Kenny Jr. said that his mother had told him that she had killed Elmer by hitting him with a hammer while he was while she was in the back seat of a car and he was riding in the front seat. Who was driving? We don't know. I have a hard time believing Ken Sr. would be involved in it. He was alive at the time. Because it was 1990 and Ken Sr. didn't die until 1994. But Elmer's body was never found. And no charges were ever filed against anybody. But this was the first person that went missing and was probably murdered after crossing Sante. In 1995, Sante and Kenny, Ken Sr.'s been dead a year now. They were suspected in an abduction of a 62-year-old heiress to the Levitts. Do you guys know who Levitts is? Levitts Furniture? Jacqueline Levitt. They're suspects in the 1995 abduction of Jacqueline Levitt from her home in Vicksburg, Mississippi. She was last seen, Levitt was last seen by a store clerk at a business where she bought some wallpaper, and she was never heard from again. And a relative went over and found her front door open. Her carpet and mattress were soaked in blood. There was obvious signs of a struggle, including Jacqueline's torn off fingernails, which were on the floor. And police believe, they suspect that Jacqueline was the victim of a botched kidnapping, and that maybe her body was thrown into the Mississippi River because it ran really close to her home. I don't know how or why Sante and Kenny were implicated in that, but it's still an unsolved case, and Sante and Kenny were never charged with it. And finally, in 2000, Jacqueline Levitt was declared legally dead. I don't know how they got intertwined with it, but I don't doubt it. I don't doubt it. Because you're going to see that Jacqueline Levitt would have been a victim that they would have loved to have gotten a hold of her assets if they could have. So I don't doubt it that they had something to do with it. Do we have all the money in the Bahamas that they were getting money out by having bank transfers done, and they also had a home in the Bahamas. There were homes all over the place, and Sante and Kenny go to the Bahamas in 1996 because there's a problem. There's a banker who was in charge of the offshore bank account, and he thought something was funny. There was something wrong with all these bank transfers. And so Sante and Kenny went to the Bahamas to meet with him. And his name was Syed Bilal Ahmed. And he had made it known to some of his coworkers that he was very suspicious of the two. And Sante and Kenny ask him to come to dinner with them. They go to one of their very favorite restaurants in Nassau. Everything looks fine. Afterwards, they get Syed to go back to their home in the Bahamas, and he's never seen from again. The authorities were very suspicious, and as soon as they found out that he had been seen with Sante and Kenny, they, of course, began to investigate them, and Sante and Kenny took off. They got out of there. It's alleged that they left with no money. They didn't get any more money out, but they got out, and no charges were ever filed. Sante, up until her death, she said, "We're innocent. We didn't do anything to that man." But that's what Sante always said, right? So that ended the Bahama money. There was not going to be any more money coming out of that offshore account. So now Sante and Kenny are really going to be struggling, right? And that was in 1996. Ken Sr. had been dead for 2 years, and these guys are still grifting and committing fraud. And it looks like they might be up to murder number 3. Then we have David Kasdan. David Kasdan was a friend of, he had been a friend of Ken Sr.'s. And when Ken Sr. and Sante were having financial problems and legal problems, and they were trying to hide assets, they went to David and asked David if they could put his name on a Las Vegas home that they had. And Kasdan had no problems with that at all. He was going to help his friend out. And he, in fact, turned around. They deeded the home to him, but then he turned around and signed a quick deed, which they kind of stowed away, so that if they needed to, or if when the coast was clear, is probably more likely the case, right? When the coast is clear and nobody's looking anymore, they can turn around and file the quick deed, and the home goes right back into their name. Well, Ken Sr.'s dead. Sante knows that they've got this Las Vegas home. She's got the quick, she has the quick deed to it, but technically, as far as the state and the government is concerned, the state government and the federal government, David Kasdan owns that home. And Sante somehow convinces a notary public to notarize documents with David Kasdan's forged name on them. And these documents were loan applications against that property for $280,000, which would be about $550,000 today. That's a healthy amount of money. Kasdan doesn't know anything about this. The home, that Las Vegas home that's in his name, is what's used as collateral for this loan. And he goes and checks his mail one day, and he finds out he's got another mortgage payment. So he calls up Sante and says, "What is going on? What are you doing? How did you take out a loan in my name?" Sante, of course, wasn't very forthcoming, and David Kasdan finally had enough. And he said, "If you don't fix this, I'm going to go to the authorities. I'm not going to be on the line for $280,000. And on March 9th of 1998, Kenny Jr., we later find out that Kenny Jr. Murdered David Kasdan in his Los Angeles home by shooting him in the back of the head. And his body was found in a dumpster by LAX, by the airport. Kenny didn't admit to the murder for about 5 years after the murder. But Sante and Kenny were definitely suspects in the murder. And now Sante and Kenny, it's 1998, and they have taken off and they're going to drive across the country because Sante has found a new victim. Oh, and I had wanted to show you. Remember good old Elmer, the attorney who came up dead? This was the Honolulu home that he burned for Sante. That was the home that he burned, and then he comes up dead. We have David Kazan comes up. Well, Elmer, they never found his body. We know he's dead. And there's poor David. David's found in the dumpster over the Las Vegas home. And here comes Irene Silverman. Irene Silverman, she was an 83-year-old socialite. She was a former ballerina. And she had married a man who was a real estate developer in New York. She was a bit eccentric, a lot of fun. They had never had any children. And how Sante found her, I don't know. Maybe it was, an article. That was how Sante found Ken Sr. But she finds her, and listen, Irene Silverman here was worth a lot of money. She owned a home, a townhome, on the Upper East Side, 65th Street in New York City. And what she had done is she had renovated this home. And the home, this was in 1998, it was worth roughly $7 million in 1998. And what she had done was she had renovated it, and she had turned it into these really grand, like, suites. But she would rent them out monthly, almost like apartments, right? And Sante got it in her head that they could, remember Irene, she was a widower. She had no children. Sante got it in her head that they could somehow, her and Kenny could somehow get their hands on this piece of property, and they could turn around and sell it. And what they do is they go to New York, and they are kind of staking her out. They're watching her every move. She kind of stuck to a schedule a little bit. She liked to go for walks in Central Park. She definitely had help. She definitely had help in this townhome. She had maids. The maids would go in. It was kind of a part of the service. If you rented an apartment from her, the maids would go in and clean the apartment every day. And she also had other help around there. And they watch her, and Sante comes up with an alias for Kenny, Manny Guerin. And I don't know how they found out who some of Irene's associates were, but they did happen to get a name of somebody that she knew. And so finally, one day is the day, and Kenny shows up at Irene's townhome and introduces himself as Manny Guerin, and that he was referred to by such and such, who was a gentleman that Irene knew very well, and that was what he used as a reference. He had, and this is what a lot of grifters, a lot of con artists do, he knew that the rent was $6,000 per month, and that's in 1998. So that tells you how nice this place was. And so what did he do? He opens up his wallet, and he's got a ton of money in it. And he says, I think that the rent is $6,000, and he just peels off the $6,000. And Irene is really impressed by that. She asks him for a driver's license or social security card, and he says, well, I don't drive. But my social security number is 554, wait a minute, 553, no, wait a minute. Oh, God, I can never remember that. Can I give it to you later? I think it's in my suitcase. I can never remember. She says, sure, no problem. He gets her, take her up to his suite. It's wonderful. And very quickly, he sneaks Sante into the building. Now, the building on the inside had cameras in certain areas. And they really, there's 2 movies that you can watch about this. And one of them, well, and I'll show you the movies in a little bit. One of them has Mary Tyler Moore that played Sante Kimes, and she did a great job. And the other has Judy Davis that plays Sante Kimes. And that's, I had seen that movie years and years and years ago. It was so good, you guys. And I could not get it here. So maybe if you live in another country, you can get it where you're at. It is so good. And that one's called A Little Thing Called Murder with Judy Davis as Sante. And it's so good. It's so over the top. Oh, Judy Davis. She says she loves Judy Davis. Me too. And she's so over the top in this role as Sante. But when they're sneaking her in to Irene's townhouse and trying to avoid the cameras, is just priceless. It really is. Irene almost immediately gets suspicious about Manny or Kenny. And she feels really uncomfortable. Almost within 24 hours, Kenny has broken into her office. She almost catches him. And he gets a hold of her passport. She doesn't know it then. But when she would go out and she would come back home, she told friends and she told some of the people that worked for her that she was very uncomfortable because she could tell that Kenny, Manny, or his secretary, which is what he said Sante was, right? She knew that they were watching her from inside of the apartment because she could see underneath the door. She could see their feet, the shadows of their feet. They were standing there watching her through the peephole of their door. And then she had one of her maids come to her and say that they wouldn't let her into the apartment to clean it. And so she had made up her mind that she was going to ask him to leave. She'd also gotten a phone call from the reference that he had given. And that person said they didn't know him. So now she really wanted him gone. It was July of 1998 in New York City. Most people, especially if they have some money, and I think if you're renting an apartment for $6,000 a month, you probably have some money. All of Irene's tenants, except for Kenny and Sante, had left the city for the summer. They had all gone to the Hamptons. And New York City can be a little bit bare in the summertime. People will just take off. Even the young people will rent homes in the Hamptons, even if they're only out there on the weekends. They want to get out of the city and get away from the heat and get into the Hamptons. So the house was pretty bare. Irene had finally managed to catch Kenny coming into the house because he avoided her at all costs. She finally managed to catch him and let him know that she wanted him to leave. And Irene met with a friend on the 4th of July for dinner at her place, dinner and drinks. And she was never seen again after the 4th of July. After about 5 days, somebody that worked for her went to the police, filled out a missing persons report, and it just so happened that that very day, the stars were going to align, and Sante and Kenny Kimes were going to be arrested. They had written a bad check for a car, and they had driven that car. They had written the check for the car in Utah. And the owner of the car dealership finally got sick and tired of Sante's lies and OBS, and he had finally gone to the authorities, and the authorities said, well, why don't you see if you can set up a meeting with them, and we'll do a sting, and if nothing else, you'll get the car back. And Sante had been complaining to the owner of the dealership when she would call him about the check. Oh, it was just a big mistake about the check. She wrote the check out of the wrong checkbook. But, she wasn't really happy with the car anymore. And here was the deal. If he could bring her a new car, then she would write him a check and cover the amount of both cars. And the owner of the dealership didn't believe this at all, but the detective said, meet them, and let's pick them up. And they arranged the meeting, and Sante and Kenny were watching the owner, and they would call, so they'd tell him to meet them at a hotel, and they'd call the hotel and say, now go over to this restaurant, and they'd call the restaurant, and they'd say, now go over to this hotel. And finally, I think that they probably went to actually meet him at the last spot, and they were arrested in front of a Hilton hotel. And when they were arrested, Sante and Kenny thought that they were being arrested for the murder of Irene Silverman, and they were very relieved. It is said that they were very relieved to find out that they were only wanted at that point they were only wanted in Utah for that $14,900 check. But the police searched the car, and when they searched the car, they found that Kenny Jr. had in his possession Irene Silverman's keys. He had cassettes of taped phone calls because he had bugged her phone when he had broken into her office. So they were listening to her phone calls. They found over 15 notebooks in which Sante had written detailed descriptions of mortgage fraud schemes that involved a bunch of intended victims that they hadn't even dealt with yet. But on that list were the names Irene Silverman and David Kasdan. Kenny had the keys, he had the cassettes of the tape recorder calls, he had loaded firearms, they had wigs, masks, plastic handcuffs, $30,000 in cash, an empty stun gun box, a substance similar to a date rape drug like Rofinol, like a roofie. And Kenny also had the forged deed, which approved the transfer of Irene Silverman's house to Sante. Sante had a shell corporation. And that deed would have transferred Irene Silverman's townhouse to Sante Shell Corporation for $395,000. The townhouse was worth $7 million. Unfortunately, the notebooks didn't say anything about murder. But the authorities really had enough to put these guys away for a while. And of course, then everything was starting to catch up with them. Then it came out about David Kasdan, that they were wanted in connection to his death, because he wasn't missing. They had actually found his body. It all started to catch up. And this kind of boggles my mind, because I don't think it really happens anymore, especially if suspects are still in custody, right? This picture right here, this is from a 60 minutes interview that these two knuckleheads gave while they were in custody, awaiting to go to trial. And if you watch this 60 minutes interview on YouTube, it is shocking. The feigned sincerity in these people, their ability to lie is shocking, because we know what they did. And they sat here during 60 minutes, and it wasn't the only interview that they gave. They sat there pleading to the public that they were being framed by New York City, by the police department, and that everybody knew how corrupt New York City cops were, and that they were being framed. And that's always Sante's. Always what she says, because somehow she's the victim of it. Ends up that Sante and Kenny were tried in New York, first for Irene Silverman's murder, which they really thought they were going to get away with because her body was never found. They used evidence recovered from that car to help establish a case against them for David Kasdan's murder. And even though the trial was really unusual because of there not having been a body found, the jury was unanimous when it voted to convict Sante and Kenny, not only of murder, but robbery, burglary, conspiracy, grand larceny, illegal weapons possession, forgery, eavesdropping. And the judge also, he was really sick of all of the interviews that they gave while they were in custody, because he said, you're out and out trying to manipulate the jury. You're out and out trying to manipulate the public. And Sante got caught passing a note in court once to a New York Times journalist. And the judge says, I'll handcuff you. Now, I'm going to tell you something. Defendants are never supposed to be handcuffed in front of a jury, and I'll tell you why. And in fact, even if they're in custody, defendants are brought into the courtroom before the jury comes in, and their handcuffs are removed, and if they're at trial, they are in, even if they're in custody, they're in regular clothes. They're not in their jail clothes, because if they were to be seen in, the jail jumpsuit, right, and handcuffs, that immediately, no matter how open-minded you are, immediately that's going to plant a seed of guilt in your mind. That's how you're going to see them. You can't help it. And so they're never allowed to be handcuffed in front of the jury. But the judge says, I'll do it. And he also told them, you two chuckleheads, you better stop holding hands and doing all this. They would hold hands. And if you watch the 60 Minutes interview with them, it's kind of almost gross, the way they're holding hands and caressing and whispering the whole time. The judge says that crap's going to stop too. When they were sentenced, because first there's the trial, and then there's the verdict, and if it's a conviction, then normally it's 30 days before you do the sentencing. You don't do the sentencing that same day, because there's a process and procedures, and there needs to be a pre-sentence report. And you also, the court also wants to give the victims' families, if it's that, or the victims themselves, depending on what kind of case it is, want to give them the opportunity to kind of take a breath and take in everything that's happened, and let them prepare a victim statement, a victim's impact statement that the judge can take into consideration when sentencing. So there's normally 30 days. And during the sentencing portion of this case, Sante, boy, she stood up and she made one heck of a statement. And here's what the jurors said. I'll show you this picture, because the jurors said, when they would bring her into court, she had let her hair go gray, and they really tried to portray her as this kind of grandmotherly, elderly figure, right? And then we were shown pictures of what she would have looked like if she was out. And it was a stark contrast to what she was portraying in court. That's a picture of her looking at the jury when they read their unanimous verdict to convict them. And Sante, and there's Kenny, that's his mugshot. Now, that is just pure evil, if you ask me. But she stood up and she gave this really long, elaborate, yeah, he is creepy, right? She gave this really elaborate and prolonged statement to the court. She blamed the authorities, and she blamed her own attorneys, that everybody was framing her and they were framing Kenny. And she compared the trial to the Salem witch trial. And she claimed that the prosecutors were guilty of murdering the Constitution. And finally, the judge told her to shut up. And when she finally shut up, the judge made it very clear that Sante was a sociopath and a degenerate, that her son was a dupe and a remorseless predator, and then the judge gave them the maximum sentence, which was 120 years for Sante and 124 years for Kenny, which effectively is a life sentence. In October of 2000, while doing another interview, and this time for Court TV, okay, Kenny was doing an interview with a Court TV reporter, Maria Zone, and he was really stressed out because now that the trial for Irene Zimmerman was over, they were threatening to extradite him to California for the death of David Kasdan. And so what does good old Kenny do? Well, he holds the reporter hostage. With a ballpoint pen held up against her throat. And this poor reporter was shocked. She had interviewed Kenny in the past and there hadn't been any problems. But this time, she was really, really scared because she knew that he'd already received 120 years for killing somebody, and that she was a reporter, so she knew about all of these other murders and missing people that these two chuckleheads were suspected of. Remember, we have Elmer, and we have Jacqueline Levitt, and we have David Kasdan, right? And she thought, what's one more murder to him? And she said while he was holding her, he held her hostage for 4 hours in the cafeteria, right? Because that's where they would do these interviews. And how he had kind of got a one-up on her was he was really hemming and hawing about answering some of her questions. And finally he said to her, I'm really hungry. Can you go get me something to eat? And she said she was getting a little fed up, but she went to the other side of the cafeteria. But it was after like 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and most of the vending machines had already been emptied out. But there was like a bottle of water in one vending machine, and there was some Snickers in another. And so she got all that. And it's then when she came back with those items that he stood up with the ballpoint pen, and he told the cameraman to put the camera down. And he took her hostage, and she said that his demands were that he did not want his mother extradited to California for David Kasdan's death, because California at that time still had the death penalty. So he did not want his mother to be extradited. And he just kept telling this poor reporter, she was terrified. She had 2 babies at home, a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old, and she thought she was never going to see them again. And she said he just kept saying, they're trying to kill me. They're going to take me out to California and they're going to kill me. And she said she finally turned to him and said, "Do you pray? Would you pray with me?" And he said yes. And after the 4 hours, Kenny removed the pen from her throat, and there was negotiators. There was hostage negotiators, even though it was inside of the jail. There was hostage negotiators there, and they created a distraction that allowed them to get the reporter out of there, and then they took Kenny down. And he was extradited to Los Angeles in 2001. He, Sante, I think, pretty much pretended, feigned some kind of illness, near-death illness, so that she couldn't be extradited. And while Kenny was out in Los Angeles, he got out there in 2001, and then he didn't go to trial until 2004 for the murder. But in between that time, his attorney had told him, "Look, just plead guilty. Plead guilty and tell everybody what your mother had to do with this. Tell everybody what happened, and we'll at least get you a life sentence. If you plead guilty and cooperate and tell everything, then the prosecutors will take the death penalty off the table." And that's what Kenny was really scared of, right? When the trial started, Kenny was obviously still pleading not guilty. That's the reason that it went to trial. But during the trial, Kenny changed his plea to guilty. And he did implicate Sante in David Kasdan's murder in exchange for a plea deal that his mother would not receive the death penalty if she was convicted. But then he later turned around and he testified in trial against his mother. And he did expose every single detail of his crime spree with Sante, and how she indoctrinated him into being her accomplice, because that's what she did. Sante, still towards the very end, she again makes another prolonged statement, accusing the police and the prosecutors of misconduct. And the judge in the David Kasdan case called Sante one of the most evil individuals she had ever encountered in her time on the bench. Sante was already serving a life sentence plus 125 years at the Bedford Correctional Facility for Women in New York, and that's where she died May 19th in 2014. And Kenny is still serving his sentence in San Diego. That was Sante during the David Kasdan trial. And these are the movies. So this movie right here with Mary Tyler Moore as Sante Kimes, it was good. It was really good. And you can find that on Lifetime. You can find so much about these two psychopaths on YouTube. The one that was my favorite is this one with Judy Davis. And if anybody can find that one, and I looked everywhere, Prime, IMDb, Tubi, Peacock, Netflix, Hulu, you name it, I went through. Sometimes people have playlists, old Lifetime movies, and it'll say old Lifetime movies, and there's like 600 movies somewhere. I went through every single one of them and could not find this one. But this was also made for Lifetime. It came out in 2006. Really good. Yeah, it was made for Lifetime, but and you can find a lot of Lifetime movies on YouTube, but I couldn't find it. It was kind of like the Cassells. Remember last week's case, the two Mr. Cassells? I wasn't able to find either. But this one I did. I was able to find it in YouTube here in the States. So that is it. That is the case of Sante and Kenny Kimes. What do you guys think about these guys? How crazy. What, and we didn't even really get into all of the arrests, the minor arrests that she had over the years for fraud and shoplifting and all the time, and she always managed to get away with it. Their big crimes were enough, but she really led a life of crime. Yeah, she was, Ronnie, I think you're right. She was soulless. But mind-boggling that she would draw your child into it, isn't it? It's really, really disturbing. But if you can watch the 60 Minutes interview, or it's diabolical. It's, if you didn't know everything that you know about them, you'd almost believe that they were really innocent. I've never seen anything like it. I've really never seen anything so convincing. So convincing. So yeah, that 60 Minutes is on YouTube. The Like Mother, Like Son is on YouTube. There was an episode of Snapped about them that's on YouTube. There was an episode of The World's Most Evil Killers, which I think I remember. I watched the episode of Dorothea on that. Dorothea Fuentes. I think that's originally like a Netflix series, but they put a lot of it on YouTube. There's also an interview that she did with Larry King. Larry King Live did an interview with her. How they got so much publicity and how they did all these interviews in regular clothes when they're sitting in jail. I just don't know how the attorneys finagled that. Yeah, this Tish W says he was just a means to an end for her. And I'm telling you, that's how she viewed everybody. Everybody was a potential victim or a potential accomplice. It's just, I haven't, in all the research that I've done, I haven't gone forward and said that that they ever had an authentic relationship or interaction with her. So, yeah, they do still walk among us. I remember when these guys were arrested in New York. And it was a big deal, and it did have a, because they were, talked about the cross-country crime spree, right? So, oh, and Kenny did finally admit, you guys remember the banker in Bahamas, when Kenny admitted to pretty much everything, right? Kenny also admitted to killing that banker in Bahamas. And what he said was that he said that both he and Sante had they acted together to drug him, And remember when the police arrested them and searched the car over Irene Silverman, over her missing, they did find that date rape drug in the car, right? So I think that was probably something that they used a lot. But they drug the banker, Syed, and then they took turns holding him down in the bathtub, drowning him. And then they went and dumped his body offshore. And, I have a feeling that that's what happened to Irene Silverman as well. I think she was dumped in some body of water. That's kind of my gut instinct about what happened with her. I think that they hit her with the stun gun, and then got her into the apartment and took care of her in there. And then I think they dumped her in a body of water because she's never been found. But yeah, I wanted to let you know Kenny did also admit to that. No admission about Jacqueline Levitt. And again, she still hasn't been found. No admission about Elmer. He hasn't been found. Elmer was the one that helped burn the house in Honolulu, and then when he got caught, he admitted, and he admitted to it, was going to help the authorities. So they burned his office in an attempt to get rid of all the evidence. And then he disappeared after telling his family he was going to go to Costa Rica with Sante and Kenny. I wouldn't go to McDonald's with Sante and Kenny. I don't know why you're going to Costa Rica, Elmer. What they told old Elmer to get him to pack a bag to Costa Rica. Okay, crazy case, right? Crazy case. Thank you for coming. Long case, lasted longer than I thought. Listen, I hope you enjoyed going and looking up some of this stuff and getting to watch some interviews of these two where you can might not see them in person, but you can really see them. And if you can catch one of those movies, I think you're going to enjoy it. Alrighty. Thank you, everybody. I will see you next week. I think next week we're going to do the Kelsey arrest. Senseless killing of Kelsey arrest. And, well, they're always, and thank you for coming. Mary Lou says, thank you, Annette. I love you sharing these crime stories with us. Ryan says, thanks. Trish says, thanks. Yes, no, thank you for coming. And, they're always intriguing, aren't they? They're always like watching a car crash. You don't wanna watch it, but at the same time you're just like kind of glued. Thank you, Tish. Thank you, Ronnie. Thank you, Trish. Thank you, Mary Lou. And I will see you guys next week. Okay.